I'll just admit now our final speaker for the education session, which is John Warhol of the Warhol Institute, and he is just joining us in the live stream. Hello, John. I think you need to unmute yourself, and then we can talk.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Thanks for joining us.
Thank God.
I would say this is a wonderful little story because I think we bumped into you on Twitter talking about education practices,
Yes,
and then managed to invite you to join us to give a talk about public engagement in microbiology. And now here you are with us in person on, well, not quite International Microorganism Day, unless you're in Japan or India or nearly, but on the doorstep of the day. So I believe you have a presentation for us about ways to engage the public with microorganisms.
Oh, I do, sir, and I hope you all enjoy it. Let me click the share screen button if it's appropriate to do that.
Absolutely.
Where is it? There we go. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for having me here, to say the least. Oh. I am here to talk to you about getting engaged and being educated. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be speaking before an international audience. At this point in my life, there's only one thing I really want to do, and it's not pipetting. All I want to do is change the world. I want to change it from a place where when people hear the word microbe, they no longer go, I don't know, I don't care, but instead say, wow, that is cool. Tell me more. But doing this is a little bit like being Daniel in the lion's den, or it's being like Hamlet, who suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, because it involves engaging the public. And engaging the public always sets up an us versus them or a me versus them situation. And this is truly outside of the comfort zone of most people. But engaging the public is really not too bad as long as you remember one rule of engagement, and that's this: microbes have stories. You need to tell those stories. And one more time for emphasis, microbes have stories. You must be able to tell those stories. Why? It's a simple question. We all know microbes are undoubtedly cool, the coolest thing on the planet, but there's not much to see, let's face it. So microbiologists need to tell what's cool about an organism and relate it to the larger world so people can understand. Having said all that, now it's story time. Here's our first story. It is simply called The Most Amazing Thing in the History of the Known Universe. And this happened only 2 years ago. We should all know about it. 2 years ago, New Jersey here in the US declared, we have a new official symbol. It's a bacterium. And that bacterium was Streptomyces griseus. The New Jersey Assembly and the New Jersey Senate and the governor all voted unanimously to make Strep griseus our official state microbe. Are you surprised? Is everybody out there surprised? Most people in New Jersey don't even know this. The history of official microbes is short and sweet. Oregon was the first. In 2013, they picked Saccharomyces cerevisiae in honor of their $2.5 billion a year craft brew industry. New Jersey in 2019, Streptomyces griseus in honor of its production of streptomycin. And Illinois, the state of Illinois, only 2 weeks ago became the third place in the universe to have an official microbe. Theirs is Penicillium rubens, which used to be known as Penicillium chrysogenum, the producer of penicillin. Why should anybody care about state microbes? To me, it's an important step in global microbial literacy. Because every place, for me, every place needs an official microbe, simply because every place has microbes and every place has official symbols. Official symbols are things that represent the character, achievements, aspirations, values of a place. As such, they could be anything. Here's some on the screen: sheep, spiders, dogs, cats, pheasants, even Kool-Aid. Official symbols can be anything, even microbes. For example, if you're fortunate to live in Roquefort-sur-Suzanne, France, it behooves you to approach your legislators and say, we'd like to have an official microbe. We think it should be Penicillium roqueforti. This is the organism that gives Roquefort cheese its characteristic blue flavor. This should be easy. The whole town of Roquefort has 700 people. I'm sure they all know each other. That's the same size as my high school graduating class. Petition your legislators, put yourself on the map as the 4th place in the world with an official microbe. Another good choice, or another alternate choice, Korea, is a wonderful organism called Vicella coriensis. It's essential in the fermentation of kimchi. It's a really cool organism because it works at below 0 or below 32, depending on where you live. It's one of 36 different organisms that are involved in kimchi fermentation. Now, to my mind, it would be great if both North and South Korea agreed on this. You can imagine that 2 nations have been at war for decades, and they both agree, we're going to have an official microbe. It's going to be Vicella coriensis, and the 2 of them are happy and get together, just like they did here in New Jersey, for a brief moment when all the Republicans and all the Democrats said, we're going to go with Strep griseus. And if you're from a place where beer, wine, or bread are important to your culture or your economy or your history, go with Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's a wonderful organism. So now that I've convinced everybody that they have to go out and get their official microbe, how do you do it? First step, discuss among yourselves. This is not a one-person job. Pick something that makes sense. It has to make sense geographically or any other way you want to do it. It doesn't have to be discovered where you are. It just has to be important to where you are. And once you get it, stick with it. Don't change it halfway through. That results in disastrous outcomes. You can ask me about that later, but stick with it. Once you know what you're going to do, communicate it to infinity and beyond, in the words of Buzz Lightyear. Use every available method to tell everybody: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Get a hold of your legislators and tell people. It's really important when you do this, it's really important to get the press on your side at the beginning of your cycle, because if you don't, it can be brutal and set you back weeks or months. And it's also very important to get students involved. Legislators love students. If we have time later, ask me about the New Jersey bog turtle, another one of our official symbols, and I'll tell you why students are important. You can get an official microbe because democracy is a participatory endeavor, and participation is basically easy. Legislators have readily available contact information. They have websites, they have internet, they have email. They're out there for you to contact. You just have to do it. And it's easy to do because microbes have stories, and we can all tell those stories. When you tell your stories about your favorite microbe, whether it's for your state organism or anything else you're doing, your stories have to be to the point. They have to be brief, they have to be interesting, and they have to be compelling. And I have to drink. Having said that, the story within the story is for Strep griseus. Strep griseus started with a 2-minute elevator pitch that I was able to give to a lot of legislators at various times here in the US. The 2-minute elevator pitch is based on the premise that you're stuck in an elevator with somebody really important, and you got to tell them everything. So what do you tell somebody who knows nothing about your favorite organism? The Strep griseus story goes something like this. Mr. Senator, New Jersey absolutely, positively needs to have its own official state microbe. And here's why. New Jersey is home to the microorganism known as Streptomyces griseus. Strep griseus produces the antibiotic streptomycin. Streptomycin is the first antibiotic after penicillin, the first American antibiotic, and the first antibiotic to kill tuberculosis. Streptomycin changed the world, like I want to do. Streptomycin-producing strain of Strep griseus was discovered in New Jersey, in New Brunswick, in dirt in 1943 by Albert Schatz. Dr. Schatz was supervised by Dr. Selman Waxman, who won a Nobel Prize for his work on streptomycin, Strep griseus, and the systematic study of soil microbes. Strep griseus and streptomycin gave birth to the American antibiotic industry, an industry that employs thousands of people, starting with drug discovery and ending with use in patients. Recognizing Strep griseus as the state microbe honors the contribution of all those people, but it does more than that. It creates the opportunity to teach basic science to people, to have them understand that microbes are essential to all life on Earth, and most of them are beneficial. And here's a copy of the proposal that this all came down to. If you go to do a project like this, you don't need a thesis. You don't need, if people still use them, a phone book. One page, bullet points, hit the highlights. Fortunately, I was at a political meeting and I was able to put this in the hands of legislators who were able to make the process happen. Remember, democracy is a participatory endeavor. As scientists, as educated people, you should get involved. Attend fundraisers or volunteer. There is no substitute for face-to-face contact with your legislator. And a really good way to do that is to invite them to your lab. Explain what it is that you're doing. You should be able to make a pitch and make people understand what you're doing, even if they're not microbiologists. But why do this at all? Again, it's not for a pat on the back. It's not to make you feel good directly. You do this because it creates the opportunity to teach basic science to people and have them learn that microbes are beneficial. Because if, like the US, microbiology is not part of your normal science curriculum in K-12 schools, it will give students a chance to learn some science when they're doing civics and social studies and they're learning about their official symbols. Having a state microbe or an official microbe of a county or a city or a region is a first step to creating broader understanding of the microbial world. Speaking of the world, the second story is called Around the World. And this is fun. And it goes like this. I have been around the world, and I have come to understand deeply and painfully that nobody knows nothing about microbes. And I said, my God, what a shame that is. So I searched for an answer. I searched far and wide, hither and yon, until at last I said, Eureka, I found it. It's the periodic table. The periodic table is the single most iconic element. It's the single most iconic thing in all of science. It hangs in every classroom from about the third grade on. People see this, they know it's science, they know it's chemistry, they know it's elements. They might not know anything else about it, but they've seen it. And I looked at that and I said, oh, I could use that. I can use that to make connections between something that people know, periodic table, and something they don't know, microbes. So I grabbed a periodic table and I shook it really, really hard, and all the elements fell out. And I replaced them with microbes. And I got something that looks like this. It's the periodic table of microbes. To do this, I went through 15,000 named organisms. I'll say that again. 15,000 named organisms. And I pulled out the ones that were cool, significant, or interesting, things that had stories to tell. And more importantly, they were organisms whose name could be reasonably abbreviated by a chemical symbol, like C for carbon became C for Clostridium on the table of microbes. And so that it's not just a pretty wall hanging, I came up with a legend, so that when you look at the table and you look at an organism, you can immediately know what it is. Like H for Haemophilus, it says negative RP in the corner, negative, gram-negative R, rod, P, pathogen. Other side of the screen, leuconostoc, positive CE. It's a gram-positive coccus, and E is for edible, so it's used in food production. This all made perfect sense to me, and it makes a beautiful wall poster. But as we all know, microbes have stories, and unfortunately, all those stories were just in my head. So in order to give people access to that, I did the companion book. It's called The Small Guide to Small Things. It's called The Small Guide because it describes 118 microbes in 300 words or less. Brief. That's an abstract. It's an abstract per organism. In addition to the 300-word summaries, it contains an introduction, which is something that will orient every reader to the world of microbes. It's the absolute minimum you need to know, or Joe Q public needs to know, in order to understand what microbes do. If somebody reads this, they will be able to have an intelligent conversation with their physician, with their nurse, with their next door neighbor who's a microbiology professor. To help orient everybody to what it does, I came up with lists, like the top 3 microbes in a variety of categories, like the hottest, the coldest, the deepest, the loneliest. I like the loneliest. It's Modestobacter. It lives in Antarctica on an ice shelf inside of a rock. It has no friends. And then lists of people, places, things, and animals that are all associated with microbes to help make the link between the bigger world and the microbial world. And I validated it. During the course of production, I validated it with blind reviews. I don't really know a lot of people because I'm basically a hermit. I sent it to the National Science Teachers Association. I had 36 people, 36 science teachers review it blind. I didn't know any of them. They looked at it and I was getting reviews back like, this was so good. I blew off my prep class, this prep period this morning before school, and I just read it from start to finish. Elio Schachter saw it after it was all done, and he said, John, we need this. He loved it. Doug Everly helped me do the editing on it, and he was positively giddy at points at the book. And most important for me is James Burke. James Burke is the world's greatest historian of science and technology. He had 12 BBC TV series. I sent him the draft cold. I don't know the guy. I thank God that he picked it up and looked at it, and he read it, and he had this to say. This is a wonderful book. I rarely enthuse, but this is outstanding work, immensely enjoyable, and full of really bad jokes. And that's part of my process in there. It's a fun, enjoyable, engaging way to introduce people to microbes. Or if you're a microbiologist, there will be stuff in here that you haven't seen because there's just so many of them. What I like to tell people is that it costs less than a burger and a Coke. It's more fun and it lasts a lot longer. My third story about microbes is called Fashions Lead to Engagement. Excuse me. Fashions lead to engagement. We're all here to learn how to engage people. Well, we know microbes are not much to look at, but there are ways around that. For example, when you're working on your state microbe, and I know you all will, or you're working on other projects, put it on a polo shirt. Put it on the front and back of a polo shirt so that people can see you coming and going. I wear this shirt and others like it all the time. It creates engagement if I'm in the supermarket buying food. It creates engagement if I'm out on the street. And see, people will look at it and say, hey, what is that? And you'll get other people who will look and say nothing, but it creates the opportunity for you to say, hey, I see you're looking at my shirt. Let me tell you how wonderful microbes are. And if you're really, really, really lucky, your microbe becomes a Jeopardy question. You can put that on a polo shirt too. On April 5th, 2021, the state microbe became an official Jeopardy question. Thrilled the heck out of me. Lower end of the budget, if you're having a project, go to anybutton.com on the internet and get your favorite project put on a button. It's a lot cheaper than a shirt. It's portable. People collect them. And these were like a dime each. And you could do them in any kind of quantity and size you want. Extremely cost-effective engagement tool. But what if you don't have a state microbe and you need a preformed graphic element? What do you think you could use? Well, I said, hey, I have this table. Let me put it on a tie. So I did. And I have a friend who's a virologist and specializes in norovirus. And she said, hey, could you give me a norovirus tie? And I said, sure. And that's there. And then on the other side of the screen, we see some guy wearing that tie on a TV interview. It stands out. It's a really wonderful tie. But here's a quick story. People watching this are all scientists. Here's the science story. I wore this to a science meeting. None of the scientists in the room said anything. Nothing. But a dozen of the facilities people in the building said, wow, that's a nice tie. So this is the person checking your ID, the person getting your coffee, the person, just people there. There's a dozen different engagement opportunities based on just wearing a tie. And I have the same experience when I go out and I talk to legislators. They'll look at it and say, nice tie, or they'll just look at it and I'm like, oh, well, let me explain my tie to you. And it creates a chance to talk to people about your science. And microbiology is important. And okay, if you don't wear ties, you could wear scarves. I put it on a scarf. Story behind the story of this is, during the first stage of our pandemic, our Dr. Birx was always on TV every night. She wore fashion scarves like you wouldn't believe. And I said, it would be really good if she had one of these because it's educational, it's not just fashionable. And I tried to find her address to send her one. And I discovered that the government thoroughly and absolutely scrubbed all contact information for her. So if any of you know Dr. Birx or her people, have them get in touch with me and I will get her a Table of Viruses scarf. And then if you're not a scarf or a tie person, you could always put your favorite organism on a t-shirt. Okay, my last and fourth story is called 200 Miles of Fishing Line. You all are probably saying, what does 200 miles of fishing line have to do with anything? Well, we all know microbes are undoubtedly cool. We know there's not much to look at. And we know you need to tell stories and be able to relate your organism to the larger world. And we also know Strep griseus is the official state microbe of New Jersey. So put them all together, what do you get? Well, during the run-up for the state microbe activities, my good friend Doug Everly said, hey, John, I think there's a lot of this stuff in the dirt. Let me do some calculations. And he did. And it turns out that there's anywhere between 75 and 280 miles of bacteria of actinomyces and streptomyces per square foot of Earth. That's a lot, but you got to conceptualize that. First of all, a square foot is something the size of a Domino's pizza box. It's a medium-sized Domino's pizza, not even the large, and it's an inch deep. And 200 miles. What's 200 miles? It's the distance from New York City to Washington, D.C. But to me, that's still a bit abstract. It's a 4-hour ride. And I'm like, how can I get this across the students that is 200 miles of anything in a Domino's pizza box? And I thought, and I said, well, it's a filamentous organism. What's the closest thing I can come up to with filaments? And the answer was fishing line. So I took it upon myself to find 200 miles of fishing line so that I could do a demo for people. And I went to every bait shop within 20 miles of my house. And I ran in the front door and I said, Mr. Tackle Shop guy, I need 200 miles of fishing line. And he said, why? And I said, state bacteria, on and on. And he said, I don't have that much. Try the guy down the street. So I repeated that about a dozen times until finally the last guy said, well, why don't you just call the factory and order some? So I did. I called the fishing line factory. And the guy there said, well, yeah, I can send you 200 miles of fishing line, but you're going to need a shopping cart to carry it around. And I said, well, that's really more than I need. It's not convenient for bringing it to a school or anything. And he said, how about 20 miles? I said, yeah, 20 miles would work. So he sent me 20 miles of fishing line. And here it is. This is a stack. Each one is 2 miles of fishing line. There's 10 in there. And it gives me 20 miles of actinomyces or streptomyces. 20 miles of bacteria is roughly the amount that's inside of an area or under an area the size of my iPhone case. That's a lot. That's a lot of really, really small organisms. And if you do a demo like this and you really want to have fun, stick a pencil in the end of one of the spools, take the loose end and you give it to a kid to run with, and he could run around the school 10, 20, 30 times, and you don't even make a dent in it. But what's 20 miles or what's 200 miles? And I started thinking, and I have this internal conflict between microbiologists and astrophysicists, because they're always using really big numbers and they have really, really great television shows and we don't. So I just started playing with the numbers and I said, well, if there's 200 miles in every square foot, how much would there be on planet Earth? So I multiplied 200 miles by all the available surface area of the US, but only an inch deep. And if you had sufficient time and really small forceps and a lot of grad students and postdocs and everybody else helping you, and you unraveled all the organisms and laid them end to end, you would get a string of bacteria 8 quadrillion miles long. That's 1,360 light years long, which coincidentally is the length of our galaxy from side to side. I just find that amazing. I find that amazing. It's like we have an infinite amount. We have an infinity of smallness beneath our feet. And I think people, it's like you tell them that. It should make them sit up and take notice. Okay, my time's up. I have rambled on for 25 minutes and I thank you for listening. Now it's time for the summary. Really quickly, microbes have stories. Tell them. Tell them with passion. Probably talk a little slower than I have here, but tell them with passion. And why should you do this? You should do this because ignorance is always bad and knowledge is always good. And by doing this, you put yourself on the side of good. I want to thank you all for listening to me. And here is my contact information in case anybody wants to get a hold of me. Thank you all.
Thank you, John, very much for that inspiring talk. You have
inspirational.
Yeah, you've inspired us. We have a podcast and we were called Microbes in Us, which you can find on Spotify and all good podcast platforms. I think we'd definitely like to invite you to it, to talk with us, but we'd also love to be able to, we're going to order a copy of your book. And I think we're going to do an episode talking about the different stories in your book. And we'll tell some stories about microbes. I think all the advice you've given here is really straightforward, simple, and great advice.
Thank you.
And we'd love to collaborate after IMD on your geographical compendium of microbes. And also, I mean, we'll do our best to push efforts to get a Netherlands microbe as best we can, but we'll see what we can do. But yeah, thank you so much for that fantastic talk. Honestly, we'd love to chat for longer, but we have to move into the next session, which is a live microscopy session, which you can watch and join in. But we'll try and get you back for the podcast. We'd love to chat to you more.
I would love to talk. My saying is anytime, anywhere, anybody wants me to talk about bacteria, I'm there. Brilliant.
Well, we'll speak very soon, and thank you again for your wonderful talk.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you soon. Good luck on International Microorganism Day tomorrow. I hope you celebrate it well and go around and tell every fish shop owner that it is International Microorganism Day and they should be celebrating.
Honestly, God, I don't make any of that up.
I believe it, and that's fantastic. So yeah, we're now going to move into the microscopy session. So we'll say goodbye to you, John.
Bye. Thank you all very much.
But see you soon for sure, and enjoy your evening.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye.